Why does Ole Miss versus Texas in the SEC title game or the playoffs feel inevitable?
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to today's Locked On Ole Miss Podcast. I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media and a former Ole Miss staff member as well. On today's show, we dive into a storyline that has been quietly building all year. As an Ole Miss fan, it's a thought that's been lingering in the back of your mind. Ole Miss versus Texas in the SEC title game or the playoffs feels absolutely inevitable. And not only that, it's with Arch Manning at quarterbacking the Longhorns. We've all thought about that. That matchup takes on even more meaning, but that's not the only layer to this story. This game would be chock full of all kinds of storylines as well. Both Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian studied under Norm Chow at USC. Jaxson Dart is on pace to break most of all of the Eli Manning passing records as well. This game feels almost destined, even though there's still a lot of football to play. It's still mid-September, but this game is one that would probably have more meaning than any other game of the postseason that's not the national championship game, honestly. So we're free and available in all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers who make the show what it is. And do not forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC, Zach Blackerby at Locked On Auburn, Clint Shamblin at Locked On Bulldogs. They offer other great perspectives of college football and even Ole Miss, to be honest. So be sure to check them out as well. You know, now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get 3 weeks of a free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So we have all seen where this movie could go. Since it was determined that Ole Miss was going to be very good this season and Ole Miss was going to potentially play for a Southeastern Conference, there's still a lot of football left to go. I realize that. All Ole Miss fans have at least been looking over at a matchup that is completely garnering all of their attention right now. And that is the Ole Miss Rebels versus the Texas Longhorns. And not just the Texas Longhorns, because if it is Texas, there's plenty of storylines right there. And it might be the most storyline game of the entire college football season already. But add in Arch Manning playing quarterback for Texas, and this becomes a completely different scenario. Arch Manning, as many people know, came in the last game against UTSA and contributed 5 touchdowns. He was SEC co-freshman of the week in his first extensive playing time. And we have all seen how this goes with the Mannings. Now, personally, I was dead wrong when it comes to quarterback evaluation of what Arch Manning could be. I was not impressed by Arch Manning's high school field. I thought he ducked the Elite 11. All of that went on. He went to Texas, but Steve Sarkisian is doing a terrific job developing him, and the Texas fans are really starting to notice. And buzz around Arch is growing. You have, fringe talks about what Arch Manning could be, and that is with Quinn Ewers only being out right now for 1 to 2 weeks. Arch is going to get a start. There is significant Wally Pipp potential happening right now. So whenever people say, well, Quinn Ewers is the quarterback, he's going to be the quarterback to the end of the year, let's hold off on that. You have a quarterback that's had trouble staying healthy. You have Arch Manning, who has all the hype in the known world, and you have Steve Sarkisian that comes from that Norm Chow, Pete Carroll tree as well of USC, where the best players play. They do not do seniority or anything like that. The best players play. So Arch against Ole Miss would be an absolutely massive storyline, with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss trying to get up over that hump and having to defeat a Manning to do it. That is going to have all the stories told that week if that game gets played, whether playoff or SEC championship game. Then you look at the other levels of this matchup. Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian were on the same staff at USC. The USC dynasty of 2003, 2004, that area with Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and all those guys, Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian played a prominent role on that staff, and they learned underneath Norm Chow, who famously learned underneath Lavell Edwards. So a lot of what Ole Miss does offensively, a lot of what Texas does offensively is based off of the principles and dynamics of what Lavell Edwards did back at BYU back in the 80s. But them knowing each other, being really good friends, Steve Sarkisian essentially replaced Lane Kiffin at Alabama. It was like one staff member to another in what Alabama's offensive dynasty was. And then on top of everything else in this Manning versus Ole Miss dynamic that could develop is the fact that Jaxson Dart is in the race for breaking nearly every one of Eli Manning's passing record. The only one that I think that Jaxson Dart's going to have a lot of trouble getting to is the passing touchdowns record. I think most everything else Jaxson Dart's going to be able to do. He already has over 1,000 yards rushing. He's already at 4th or 5th in the SEC or Ole Miss passing rankings, and he has to average like 290 yards to break that passing record by the Egg Bowl. That's the way he's sitting. So if Ole Miss plays Texas, there's a chance that Jaxson Dart has already broken Eli Manning's record, who broke himself a ton of Archie Manning's record. And we all know what the Mannings mean to Ole Miss. The road to the indoor practice facility, the Manning facility, is on Manning Way. The Manning name holds a ton of sway with the Ole Miss fan base. And this game would cause all sorts of anxiety on Ole Miss fans because they genuinely love the Mannings and everything about them. Arch Manning having to be the final boss to get Ole Miss over that SEC championship hurdle would probably be more than some could take. And this game feels inevitable. Every storyline that happens, Arch playing so well, Jaxson Dart playing so well, Ole Miss being almost a juggernaut to where Texas and Ole Miss right now are playing like the two best football teams in the entire country. This feels like a collision course is underway between Texas and Ole Miss. Now, like I said, there's a lot of football to be played, and neither Texas or Ole Miss have played a conference game at this point. So we are putting the cart way ahead of the horse right now. But in the back of the mind, in all these Ole Miss fans, they're thinking about what can be. And Arch Manning being the final boss for Jaxson Dart and Lane Kiffin to win that trophy in the conference is definitely on the table right now. Arch Manning and Steve Sarkisian standing in front of Jaxson Dart and Lane Kiffin in the playoffs, that is absolutely potentially in the cards this season. Everybody can see how this will happen and the anxiety that it's going to produce, especially amongst the older Ole Miss fans with that last name Manning in place, is going to be more than some can take. But I will say this. I hold no ill will, whatever. Arch Manning in Texas, that's fine. That's nothing. That doesn't mean anything for Eli Manning. That doesn't mean anything for Archie Manning and what has made Ole Miss's football legacy over the last 50 years. But that Manning name is going to be a massive storyline. And if Arch has a big game in their first start of the season, I do think that Arch Manning's first SEC start might be in against Mississippi State, which means he could put up video game numbers that day. So we'll see. We have all seen how these Manning quarterbacks have gotten their jobs through college. Eli waited his turn. Peyton was basically thrust into the game as a first game backup that got in against UCLA in 1994. We'll see what happens. I am personally looking forward to everything this could be if it happens. This game would be basically SEO catnip, as I like to say, between Lane Kiffin, Arch Manning, and all of that happening. My view count that week will be somewhere in the 12 to 13,000 view per episodes on YouTube. So yes, I want that to happen, but I am acknowledging that it will be very anxious and very anxiety inducing for older Ole Miss fans. But it does look like, honestly, if you look at what's happening in college football right now, and like I said, there's a lot of football left to be played. But if you just look right now, Texas and Ole Miss are on a collision course. And with a quarterback at Texas that has a trouble staying healthy, doesn't no matter what he's doing, Arch Manning could ease right into that competition as it goes on. So we'll see exactly how that happens. With the Manning name buzzing in every Ole Miss fan's mind, it's easy to overlook this weekend's matchup, if you're thinking about that. But don't sleep on Georgia Southern. We'll break down the keys to the victory and what the Rebels need to do to stay on track. Hey, Locked On Ole Miss fans, have you heard about ROY? It stands for Return on You, and it's a groundbreaking platform that lets you, the fans, get directly involved into NIL like never before by contributing directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. And this is what I've been talking about for a couple of weeks now. As you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. ROY changes the NIL games for the fans. With ROY, fans can directly support players. It gives you the power back to to support your favorite college athletes, letting you play a key role in shaping your team's future while helping athletes maximizing their NIL potential. Plus, when you contribute to a successful campaign, you get exclusive content access, like decision announcements, behind-the-scenes footage, personal reflections, all available to the fans that contributed to that athlete. Download ROY on iOS or Android right now and enter the referral code Locked On. That's 2 words, Locked On, to be automatically entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for more details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with ROY. Support the players, change the game. College football is back for week 4 this weekend. It's not too late to catch up on the action before the season kicks off. Whether you're SEC, ACC, Big 10, or Big 12, it doesn't matter. You can get all the information to get you ready for an exciting weekend of college football from the Locked On stable of college football experts by subscribing to the College Football Podcast, Locked On College Football Podcast. That's easy for me to say. Who has a chance to make the playoffs, which teams will cause chaos in their new conferences, everything you need to know all in one place. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On College Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So with that inevitability popping in there, I did want to do a segment on that because of the way everything seemingly has been going over the past couple of weeks. It is easy to forget that Ole Miss has a football game this weekend against a pretty good team. And because of that game, we need to talk about what Ole Miss needs to do. If you want to look at the keys to the game against Georgia Southern, hey, a fast start at home against a defense that has been giving up 500 yards per game. Georgia Southern's a decent Sun Belt team. We'll have Dave Schultz on the show Thursday talking about them, but they have been problematic and played Boise State, Nevada, and South Carolina State in their first 3 games. They're 2-1, but they're giving up 500 yards per game against those teams. Run the ball. Boise State ran for nearly 400 yards against Georgia Southern, and Georgia Southern has been giving up an average of 240 yards per game against Boise State, Nevada, and South Carolina State. South Carolina State ran for like 120 yards just so you know. And clean up the sloppiness of the Wake Forest game and get back to playing clean. If Ole Miss does that, they're fine. They're one of the most talented teams in all of the country, but they need to play clean. If you let the other team into the game, a lot of these teams are good enough to take advantage of that, and all of a sudden you'll end up with a loss that you shouldn't have if you do not play clean. And Ole Miss against Wake Forest absolutely did not play clean. I think this is going to be a run game, and we talked about that. They talk about road games, pack your defense and pack your run game. I think Ole Miss needs to be ready to run the football against Georgia Southern, at least to bring those safeties to the line of scrimmage. I talked to Bill Flowers last night. He talked about how you're going to see Boise State, or not Boise State, Georgia Southern back up because they're afraid of Trey Harris. They're afraid of Juice Wells, Caden Prieskorn, those guys at receiver. That genuinely strikes fear into this defense. So because of that, you're going to have some lighter boxes that you can run into. And over this course of the season, Ole Miss has been able to take advantage of that. You have Henry Parrish Jr., who this season has 45 carries, 354 yards, and 6 touchdowns. And if Ole Miss would have committed to the run game against Furman, they could have run for 450 yards in that game. But Henry Parrish will be the leading rusher right now in the Southeastern Conference if that would have happened. That's just the real thing. He would have had nearly 500 yards rushing at this point and been the leader in the Southeastern Conference through 3 games if Ole Miss would have committed to that game. Another running back is Matt Jones, who Lane Kiffin yesterday talked about, hey, there's nothing wrong with Ulysses Bentley IV. Matt Jones just beat him out. And that's a cool thing. We talked in the first segment about being from that USC tree with Norm Chow to where the best players play. You don't have seniority or any of this stuff that makes sense. It's all about the best players being on the field playing in the game. And Matt Jones right now, 22 carries, 165 yards, and 3 touchdowns in 3 games. He's averaging nearly 50 yards per contest on a little over 7 carries. He is doing all right. He's averaging about 7 yards per carry, if my Simpson County math is fairly correct on this one. Interesting. He has 3 touchdowns on the year. And of course, those guys are really successful because of what Jaxson Dart is doing right now. He's throwing for nearly 400 yards per game, like real close, like 395 yards per game, 83% completion percentage, 73 for 88, 8 touchdowns. That's nearly 3 touchdowns per game. He did have the 1 interception that he forced the ball up. And that's important to realize what he's doing and how efficiently he's running the offense. And part of the reason he is able to do that is because he has somebody like Trey Harris on the outside who is putting Bolentnikoff level numbers up right now. I don't want to hear anybody talk about skill players everywhere. At 20, he's averaging nearly 10 catches per game. He's averaging about 150 yards per game, and he has a couple of touchdowns as well. Trey Harris is having an unbelievable year. So offensively, you can see where I'm coming from, to where Ole Miss kind of has the advantage in this game. And when you have those weapons on the outside and you have a rush defense that has been proven to be gashed by Boise State earlier for nearly 400 yards, Heisman candidate or not, them rushing for 6 touchdowns and stuff like that, that was a big deal, even if you're trying to do run fits. And with Henry Parrish and Matt Jones and those guys doing work, you can see how they should be able to take advantage of obviously what will be a scared secondary of what can happen with those weapons out there. Juice Wells has 3 touchdowns on the year, including an amazing one-handed catch against Wake Forest. Ole Miss is in position to win this game. They just are. Ole Miss is a 36-point favorite at home at Vaught Hemingway Stadium. It's a College Corner powder blue game. So if you need to pick up a powder blue shirt for the game, hit the College Corner store right now if you want to order online, or you can go to their location on Sisk Avenue in Oxford. But if you do that and you see what's going on, Ole Miss should win this game. This is a game that if Ole Miss cleans up what happened, and we're going to talk the next segment about Ole Miss's need to clean up, to not play sloppy. If Ole Miss is able to do that at home, they're going to boat race Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern might score a touchdown. Somebody eventually has to do it. Somebody's going to score a touchdown in 2024. It's going to happen. I'm almost at the point where Georgia Southern, I wish we would get that over with and Ole Miss would win 52-10. But we'll see what happens. The defense, whenever the red zone plays, they are an elite red zone team right now. Georgia Southern is pretty good throwing the football, so Ole Miss needs to avoid the penalties on the back end of that defense. They're playing a little bit too physical right now, especially on the road in the ACC, but they're getting ready when Dane Key and Barian Brown comes in for Kentucky, and South Carolina comes in with that guy that's a 99 speed on College Football 25, and LSU obviously has dudes at wide receiver. You need to make sure that you're in good place. There wasn't the bust that we saw in the first two games. Those didn't happen. What happened was they used the slow mesh occasionally effectively. Ole Miss was able to handle business as the field constricted, but Wake Forest was able to make some plays off of that slow mesh as well. I'm pretty fired up about what Ole Miss can do in this game. And after a sloppy performance against Wake Forest, Ole Miss looks to clean things up in their final tune-up against Georgia Southern. Can the Rebels tighten it up before the season kicks off? For sure, with SEC games. It's their last dress rehearsal, so do not miss it. You know, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. You can get Ole Miss at 36 points favored over Georgia Southern right now. Or if you're more big picture thinking, Ole Miss's odds of winning the national championship is gone down a little bit. It's now plus 1,200. Or Jaxson Dart, whose odds gone down a little bit, his Heisman odds are at plus 600. That's 6-1 to win the Heisman Trophy right now. And you're starting to see him pop up on a lot of top 3 lists. So we'll see exactly what he does. Whatever your flavor is, you can get it today. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Listen, that game against Wake Forest was a sloppy mess. Now, Ole Miss won the game 40-6. But we told you before the season, we're going to harp on stuff about winning that national title. Now, and it's just in a situation because one of the traps that people have is whenever you're trying to look at what is actually going on, you just criticize whatever you can because they view criticism as ways to let you know problems. But if you're looking for things to criticize about, it can be very wrong. I'm very wary about coming down on the secondary because I think the secondary, it looks fine. There's a little bit of handsy and a little bit of things that they can work on and do all right. But right now, I'm not necessarily worried about it. I'm not necessarily worried about the run game. I'm not necessarily worried about the offensive line at this point. Nothing has been shown to me at a point to where I am worried about these units. But there are some things that can be cleaned up. And the cleaner Ole Miss plays, the better they're going to play in a game. And once you play teams like Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia, those clean games are going to be very important. They just are. So we'll see how it handles. But the way it sits right now is Ole Miss has to clean up the Wake Forest game. Like I said, Ole Miss won 40-6 in that game. So we are kind of picking nits whenever you look at what's happened at Wake Forest. You had a situation where when that game was 23-6 at halftime, Wake was never winning that game. It was never going to happen. When Wake was on the 5-yard line, down 23-6 in the third quarter, it was no guarantee that they were going to score. Ole Miss was good enough to keep them out of the end zone. They have the talent necessary to do that. But Ole Miss has to figure out a way to avoid penalties, to avoid bad snaps, to avoid forcing the football, because those sudden change opportunities, those penalties that are drive killers, whenever you keep other teams on the field committing a hold or a pass interference on a third down, that is problematic when you're playing the best of the best. So when I talk about cleaning up, that's what they need to clean up. If they play clean against Georgia Southern, they're going to win this game 70-3. They just are, because they're that much better than Georgia Southern. But the question is going to be, Ole Miss is going to come off with a fast start, because we've seen over the past several games, Ole Miss comes out with a fast start. That's what they do. They take the kickoff, they go down and score a touchdown, they get a stop, they go down and score a touchdown. The game is essentially over at that point. But what is going to happen for Ole Miss after it lulls a little bit? Against Wake Forest in the second quarter, it was 3-3. A 23-6 game. After Ole Miss was up 20-0, it became 23-6. Against Furman, there was a lull. Against Middle Tennessee, there was a lull in the middle part of the game. And a lot of that has to do with what Bill Flowers talked about on last night's show about retaining focus for the large part of the game. And why Nick Saban was so good at what he did was a lot by keeping people's ability to stay locked in during the game. Can Ole Miss avoid that lull? And if they do have that lull, can they just keep Georgia Southern out of the end zone to where they can't necessarily affect you and affect the game? Because this is an air raid team. Georgia Southern, they used to be ground and pound. They used to be Paul Johnson. They used to be run the football when they had Adrian Peterson and those guys playing running back at Georgia Southern. This is an air raid team now. This is a Clay Helton air raid team. And an underrated story that we're probably going to talk about tomorrow a little bit is Clay Helton is the guy that recruited Jaxson Dart to Southern California as a true freshman. There is going to be a little bit of knowledge of what Clay Helton likes to do in certain situations. And Jaxson Dart has that advantage, and he's probably getting leaned on a little bit over the course of this week. But this is an air raid team. And over the course of the Wake Forest game, the slow mesh showed that if you can accordion expand the safeties and the linebackers from their run fits in the play action game, you can have some positions and some balls that can be completed in the middle of the field. Now, Ole Miss's defense is way too good and way too talented for you to make a living doing that, but you're probably going to make some plays over the course of the game. And Georgia Southern is throwing the ball at about a 240, 250-yard clip per game. It's very air raidy. They're very good in the red zone. They're doing a lot of stuff at their G5 level right now that is good, but they're about to have a step up in competition that I'm not 100% sure they're ready for. And which is the case for most G5. This isn't slamming Georgia Southern even a little bit. Whenever you step up like this, the tempo for Ole Miss, is surprising to you, and Ole Miss can jump on you. The trench play for Ole Miss on the offensive and defensive line is at such a level that it takes a second for the offensive and defensive lines of the other team to get acclimated to what is going on. None of this stuff is real, but if Ole Miss comes out and does what it's supposed to do and plays clean and all of that, Ole Miss might score 65 or 70 points this game. Now, most of the time that doesn't happen, and you end up with a 40-6 or a 52-3 or something like that. So the ceiling for Ole Miss is way up there. The floor is probably 38-10, 38-17. Somewhere in between there is where I think this game is going to end up. And we'll see. We'll do our What to Watch For episode tomorrow. We'll have your Know Your Enemy on Thursday with Dave Schultz from Locked On Sunbelt talking about the Eagles, and we'll tell you why Ole Miss wins on Friday. All before the pregame show with John Macon Gillespie, the postgame show about an hour after the end of the game, and, of course, the roundtable reaction on Sunday. We'll have the Michael Katz, Tom Vanderford, Michael Borky said he is going to come on the show this week as well. So there's a lot of great stuff for Ole Miss fans this week and a lot of people that'll be really interested to talk about what's going on. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast out there, and your support means the world to us. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to the Locked On College Football podcast down in the description, so you don't even have to search for it as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And exciting news, you can now become a Locked On Ole Miss Insider. It's the best and easiest way to stay updated on all things Ole Miss sports. It's our texting program that sends you notifications on anything relevant without the hassle of message boards filled with trolls. Enjoy a 14-day free trial. Experience the future of college sports coverage. We're adding new perks as we grow, so do not miss out. The link is down in the description as well. And for those of you watching on YouTube right now, we're going to send you to Locked On College Sports. Take care and hotty toddy.